The year is 48 BC. It is late, past midnight. The palace of the Ptolemies in Alexandria is quiet, except for the guards, and the man who shouldn't be here. Julius Caesar is sitting in a room that doesn't belong to him, in a city that doesn't want him, on a continent where his authority means nothing. He arrived in Alexandria 4 days ago with 4,000 legionnaires, chasing a dead man. Pompey, his rival, the man he'd fought a civil war to destroy, had fled to Egypt seeking refuge. The Egyptians solved that problem for Caesar. They cut off Pompey's head and delivered it in a basket, a gift. Caesar reportedly wept when he saw it, not from grief, from the insult. Pompey was a Roman consul. You don't butcher a consul and hand him over like a slaughtered goat, not even to the man who wanted him dead. Now Caesar is stuck. Egypt is in the middle of its own civil war. The boy king Ptolemy XIII, 13 years old, rules from this palace with a team of advisors who murdered Pompey and would happily murder Caesar if they thought they could get away with it. Ptolemy's older sister, exiled, stripped of power, is somewhere in the desert raising an army to take back the throne. Caesar doesn't care about Egyptian politics. He cares about Egyptian grain. Rome eats because Egypt grows wheat. Whoever controls Egypt controls whether Rome starves. So he has inserted himself into this mess, announced he will arbitrate the dispute between brother and sister, and is now sitting in a palace surrounded by people who are calculating whether he's more useful alive or dead. There's a knock. A servant enters. There is a merchant here with a gift for the general. A carpet, Sicilian weave. Caesar doesn't have time for carpets. But he's also a politician, and refusing a gift in a foreign court is a diplomatic error. He waves the servant forward. 2 men carry in a long rolled carpet and set it on the floor. They bow. They leave. The carpet begins to unroll, not on its own. Someone is inside it, pushing, twisting, working themselves free. And then, onto the stone floor of the Ptolemaic palace, spills a young woman. She's breathing hard. Her hair is disordered. There's dust on her dress. She has just been smuggled through a harbor controlled by her brother's soldiers, past checkpoints, past guards who would have killed her on sight, rolled inside a bedding sack carried on the back of a Sicilian merchant named Apollodorus. She stands up. She looks at the most powerful man in the world, and she smiles. She is 21 years old. Her name is Cleopatra. What happens in this room, in the next few hours, will pull the thread that unravels the Roman Republic. 2 decades of war, betrayal, suicide, and the end of an era that stretches back 5 centuries will trace their origin to this night. To whatever this woman said to this man, to whatever she did that made Julius Caesar the most disciplined political mind in the ancient world, a man who had spent 30 years never making a decision based on emotion, look at a 21-year-old exile with no army and no allies, and decide to hand her the richest kingdom in the Mediterranean. Plutarch, writing roughly 150 years later, but drawing on sources now lost to us, including what scholars believe were the memoirs of Cleopatra's personal physician, Olympus, says Caesar was immediately charmed, not by how she looked, by what Plutarch calls the persuasion of her speech and the character that surrounded all her interactions. Her conversation, he writes, had an inescapable quality. The sound of her voice was pleasure in itself, and her tongue was like an instrument of many strings that she could tune to whatever language she chose. Think about what's happening in this room. Caesar has spent 9 years in Gaul. He has waged a civil war across 3 continents. He has not had a conversation with an equal in months, maybe years. The Senate fears him. His officers obey him. The women of Rome are either kept silent at dinner parties or perform flattery so transparent it's indistinguishable from mockery. And now, in front of him stands a woman who speaks his language fluently, who can discuss the logistics of grain taxation and the philosophy of Aristotle in the same breath, who has just risked her life in a rolled carpet to reach him, and who is looking at him not with fear, not with deference, but with the expression of someone who has a proposition. She needed him. That much is obvious. Without Roman military support, she had no path back to the throne. Her brother's advisors controlled the treasury, the army, the palace. She was in exile. But here's what matters. She didn't come to Caesar as a beggar. She came as an offer, an opportunity. She arrived in a way that was daring, unexpected, theatrical, slightly absurd, and impossible to ignore. She turned a political meeting into an event. She made herself the most interesting thing that had happened to Julius Caesar in years. And Caesar, the man who calculated everything, made a decision that defied calculation. He chose her. Within weeks, he had installed Cleopatra on the throne. Her brother Ptolemy XIII was dead, drowned in the Nile during a military engagement that Caesar's legions won decisively. Cleopatra, 21 years old with no army and no treasury, was now queen of the wealthiest country in the Mediterranean. And then Caesar did something that no one who knew him could explain. He stayed. If you've ever wondered why certain people in history seem to operate on a different level than everyone around them, why they bend events around themselves like gravity, Dust and Dynasty is where we break down the mechanism, not the myth, the method. Hit subscribe. It's free and it takes 1 second. Now, back to Alexandria. Because what Cleopatra did next is where the story turns from remarkable into something closer to terrifying. Julius Caesar had never lingered anywhere. This was a man who crossed the Rubicon rather than wait, who dictated letters to 3 secretaries simultaneously while riding between battles, who conquered Gaul in 8 years through relentless, constant, almost pathological forward motion. He did not take vacations. He did not pause. He paused. For months, Caesar remained in Alexandria with Cleopatra. They sailed up the Nile together on a royal barge. Appian, the Greek historian, records the voyage. Athenaeus, writing later, describes Ptolemaic royal barges in detail that seems designed to test the reader's credulity. 400 feet long, multiple decks, dining halls with columns, gardens, shrines, gold fittings, a floating palace that moved through a landscape older than Rome by 2,000 years. Every mile of that river was a message. Temples rising from the banks, colossal statues of pharaohs who had ruled when Rome was still mud huts on a hill. A civilization so ancient, so layered, so saturated with power, that it made the Roman Republic look like a construction project still in progress. And at the center of it all, Cleopatra. Not just showing him the sights, showing him a model. The pharaoh answered to no one but the gods. The pharaoh was a god. There was no senate, no committee, no shared power. Just absolute authority dressed in gold and religion. For a man who was already being whispered about as a potential king of Rome, this wasn't tourism. It was a demonstration of what he could become. But the real mechanism was subtler than spectacle. Robert Greene, in his study of history's greatest seducers, identifies what Cleopatra did to Caesar as the creation of a total experience. She didn't appeal to one sense. She overwhelmed all of them simultaneously. The food, the music, the perfume, the setting, the conversation, the intellectual stimulation, the physical presence. Every element was curated to create an environment so rich, so unlike anything Caesar had experienced in his disciplined Roman life, that leaving it felt like a loss. And she was the only source. You couldn't get this experience anywhere else. You couldn't replicate it with anyone else. She had made herself irreplaceable, not through beauty, through architecture. She had built a world and placed herself at its center, and the only way to stay in that world was to stay with her. She gave him a son, Caesarion, Little Caesar, a child who, by Egyptian tradition, was heir to the Ptolemaic throne, and by blood, was heir to the most powerful man in Rome. The political implications were staggering. Caesar had no legitimate male heir in Rome. Caesarion was a living bridge between 2 empires. And Cleopatra had built that bridge with her body. Then she let him go. This is the part that most people miss. She didn't cling. She didn't follow him to Rome immediately. She didn't beg or weep or threaten. She let Caesar return to the city that needed him, knowing that the memory of Alexandria would do more work than her physical presence ever could. Greene calls this strategic withdrawal, the understanding that desire doesn't intensify in proximity, it intensifies in absence, that the mind embroiders what it cannot have, that Caesar, sitting in the gray Roman winter, surrounded by terrified senators and ambitious rivals, would think about that barge on the Nile and feel something he had never felt before, longing. Caesar returned to Rome and began behaving in ways that alarmed everyone who knew him. He declared himself Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. He placed a golden statue of Cleopatra in the temple of Venus Genetrix, the goddess from whom his family claimed divine descent. Cassius Dio and Appian both record this. A foreign queen installed as an image in one of Rome's most sacred spaces. The Senate understood what they were looking at, not a love affair, an alignment that could reshape the entire Mediterranean. When Cleopatra arrived in Rome in 46 BC, living in a villa across the Tiber with Caesarion, even Cicero visited. He records the experience in a letter to Atticus with barely concealed irritation. He found her arrogant, which tells you she didn't perform humility for Rome's greatest orator. She didn't need to. She had Caesar. On March 15, 44 BC, 23 stab wounds ended it. Among the grievances the assassins carried, one appears repeatedly across the sources. He was going to make himself king. And the implication, never quite stated but impossible to miss, was that the Egyptian queen had shown him how. Cleopatra left Rome within weeks of the assassination. She returned to Alexandria with Caesarion. She was 25 years old. She had lost the most powerful man in the world, the father of her son, the only military force standing between her throne and chaos. In 4 years, she had gone from exile in a carpet to Queen of Egypt, to partner of Rome's dictator, to widow and target. She needed to find another Roman, and she needed to do it differently. Mark Antony was not Julius Caesar. Understanding this is understanding everything Cleopatra did next. Caesar was cerebral, a writer, a strategist, the thinnest man in the room, and usually the smartest. Antony was physical, a drinker, a brawler, a soldier's general who slept on the ground with his men and laughed louder than anyone at the table. He was brave in battle, generous with money, and terrible with decisions. He had spent his entire life being told he wasn't serious enough, not disciplined enough, not Roman enough in the ways that Roman aristocrats measured each other. Caesar had kept him close and useful, but never trusted him with the things that required patience. After Caesar's death, Antony emerged as one of 3 men who divided the Roman world. He took the east, the richest provinces, the territories closest to Egypt, and in 41 BC, he summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus to answer for her conduct during the recent civil wars. A summons, an order from a Roman commander to a client queen. Cleopatra's response became the most famous entrance in the ancient world. She didn't come when called. Days passed. Antony sat in the Tarsus marketplace, on a raised tribunal, waiting. Messages went back and forth. She would arrive when she was ready. She was building anticipation, establishing, before they'd spoken a word, that the dynamic between them would not be what he expected. When she finally came, she came by water. Plutarch describes it, and even his prose, usually restrained, strains under the weight of what he's reporting. The barge that sailed up the Cydnus River had a golden stern. The sails were purple. The oars were silver, and kept time with the music of flutes, pipes, and lutes. Cleopatra lay under a canopy of gold cloth, dressed as Aphrodite. Attendants costumed as cupids fanned her on both sides. Women dressed as sea nymphs worked the rudders and the ropes. Perfume burned on the banks. Incense so heavy that Plutarch says crowds gathered along the river, drawn by the scent before they could see the ship. People poured out of the city to watch. The marketplace emptied. Antony was left sitting alone on his tribunal, while the entire population of Tarsus went to see the queen arrive. Think about the precision of that humiliation. She had summoned the city away from him, without a word, without a gesture. She had made every person in Tarsus choose between watching Antony sit on a bench and watching a goddess sail in on a golden ship. The choice wasn't difficult. By the time she docked, the power dynamic had already been inverted. She invited him to dinner, on her barge, not at his headquarters, not on neutral ground. Her space, her rules, her environment. Plutarch says the number of lights suspended from the ceiling was so extraordinary, arranged in squares and circles, that it was one of the most dazzling spectacles anyone had ever witnessed. Now here's what made this fundamentally different from what she'd done with Caesar. She had read Antony the way a musician reads an audience. For Caesar, she had been the intellectual, the equal, the woman who could match his mind and show him a world beyond the Senate's reach. That approach would have been useless with Antony. Antony didn't need to be intellectually stimulated. He needed something else entirely. He needed permission. Roman culture was built on gravitas, duty, self-denial, seriousness. Antony had spent his life failing to live up to those ideals and being punished for it. Every mentor, every patron, every aristocrat in Rome had looked at him and seen potential wasted on wine and women. Cleopatra looked at him and saw something nobody else had bothered to see: a man who was suffocating. She drank with him, she gambled with him, she hunted with him. Plutarch records, with visible bewilderment, that they wandered the streets of Alexandria together at night, dressed as commoners, knocking on doors and running away, getting into scraps with strangers. The Queen of Egypt, playing pranks in alleyways like a teenager. Plutarch couldn't understand it. What he was witnessing, without the vocabulary to name it, was the precise engineering of psychological dependency. She wasn't entertaining Antony. She was creating a space where he could exist without judgment, where the things Rome punished him for, his appetite, his impulsiveness, his need for excess, became virtues. Where he felt, perhaps for the first time in his life, that someone saw who he actually was and didn't need him to be someone else. She changed her entire personality between the two men. For Caesar, she was the scholar queen. For Antony, she was the adventure. Greene identifies this as the siren's fundamental technique. She becomes the thing you're missing, the thing your life doesn't provide, the fantasy you can't articulate but recognize the instant you encounter it. And once you've experienced it, the rest of the world tastes like water. Antony stayed in Alexandria for an entire winter. He returned to Rome briefly, married Octavian's sister for political reasons, then went back to Cleopatra. He never really left again. For 13 years, he remained in her orbit. He recognized Caesarion as Caesar's legitimate son, threatening the political position of Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir. He granted Roman territories to Cleopatra's children in a public ceremony in Alexandria called the Donations. He married her under Egyptian rites while still legally married to a Roman wife. Each decision pulled him further from Rome. Each one made perfect sense inside the world Cleopatra had built for him, and each one was a gift to his enemies. If this moment doesn't make you want to understand how a single person reshaped the ancient world without commanding a single legion, you're missing the lesson these 2,000 years have been trying to teach. Subscribe to Dust and Dynasty, because the most dangerous weapons in history have never been the ones you can see. Now, let's watch what happens when the world Cleopatra built finally collides with the one she couldn't control. Octavian was 23 years old when he began the campaign that would destroy Cleopatra. He was sickly, physically unimposing, and completely ruthless. He was also, perhaps, the greatest political strategist in Roman history. He understood something essential. He couldn't attack Antony directly. Romans fighting Romans was civil war. Civil war was expensive, destabilizing, and politically toxic. But a Roman Senate declaring war on a foreign queen who had corrupted one of Rome's commanders? That was patriotism. Octavian launched a propaganda campaign that Roman poets, historians, and orators amplified for decades. Horace called Cleopatra a fatale monstrum, a deadly monster, and wrote of her drunken ruin. Propertius called her the whore queen. The message was consistent and relentless. Antony had not chosen to abandon Rome. He had been enslaved, bewitched, unmanned by a foreign seductress who was using pleasure as a weapon to dismantle the Republic from the inside. Some of this was exaggeration, but the most effective propaganda is built on a recognizable truth, and the truth was that Antony had changed. His own officers could see it. Plutarch records that Roman commanders who visited Antony in Alexandria were disturbed by what they found. A general who deferred to a queen, who adopted Egyptian customs, who seemed to have forgotten what Rome expected of its men. In 32 BC, the Senate declared war, not on Antony, on Cleopatra. The legal fiction was transparent but effective, and in September of 31 BC, the two sides met at Actium on the western coast of Greece. Antony and Cleopatra had assembled a massive fleet, but months of blockade by Octavian's admiral, Agrippa, had ravaged them. Disease swept through the crews. Soldiers deserted. By the time battle was joined, the fleet was operating at a fraction of its strength. What happened next has been debated for 2,000 years. In the middle of the fighting, Cleopatra's squadron of 60 Egyptian ships broke formation and sailed south, away from the battle, toward Egypt. And Antony, in full view of his fleet, abandoned his flagship, boarded a smaller vessel, and followed her. His men watched him go. Soldiers who were at that moment fighting and dying under his command watched their general chase a sail over the horizon. Cassius records that some refused to believe it until the ships were gone. Others fought on for hours before realizing he wasn't coming back. The fleet surrendered. 19 legions surrendered days later without a fight. Was the withdrawal planned? Military historians like Barry Strauss have argued that a breakout may have been the only viable option given the depleted state of the fleet. Was it panic? Plutarch implies Cleopatra fled, and Antony, helpless, followed. Whatever the truth, the optics were annihilating. Every accusation Octavian had made, that Antony was enslaved, that Cleopatra controlled him, that he would choose her over his own men, was now confirmed in the most public way imaginable. They retreated to Alexandria. Octavian followed slowly. There was no hurry. The outcome was already decided. When his forces reached Egypt in the summer of 30 BC, Antony's remaining troops surrendered or defected. Antony, receiving a false report that Cleopatra was dead, fell on his sword. The wound wasn't immediately fatal. He was carried to her and died in her arms. He was 53 years old. He had spent the last 13 years inside a world built by someone who understood him better than he understood himself. Octavian wanted Cleopatra alive. He needed her for his triumph, the ceremonial procession through Rome where conquered enemies were paraded in chains. A living Cleopatra, dragged through the streets of the city she had terrified for 2 decades, would be the definitive image of his victory. Cleopatra understood this. She had spent her entire life studying how spectacle worked. She knew that whoever controls the final image controls the story, and she was not going to let Octavian write her ending. She negotiated with him. She appeared to cooperate. Cassius records that Octavian sent intermediaries to assure her she would be treated well. She may have even attempted to charm him the way she had charmed his predecessors. Plutarch suggests she tried. It didn't work. Octavian was perhaps the only powerful Roman of his generation who was completely immune to personal charisma. He operated on calculation alone. When she realized negotiation had failed, she acted. On August 12, 30 BC, Cleopatra was found dead in her chambers. She was 39 years old. She was dressed in full royal regalia, the crown of Egypt on her head, laid out on a golden couch, composed, arranged, even in death, staged like a queen. Her attendants, Iris and Charmian, were dead beside her. When Octavian's soldiers burst in, Charmian was still barely alive, adjusting the diadem on Cleopatra's head. One of the soldiers shouted at her, "Was this right, Charmian?" And Charmian, dying, answered, "It is entirely right and fitting for a queen descended from so many kings." Then she fell and said nothing more. Plutarch records that Octavian, when he saw the body, was furious and impressed simultaneously. She had denied him the triumph. She had controlled the last scene. The woman who had spent her life engineering unforgettable moments had made her death the most unforgettable moment of all. The traditional story says she was killed by an asp, a cobra hidden in a basket of figs. Modern toxicologists doubt this. Cobra venom causes convulsions, swelling, and violent death, inconsistent with the composed scene Plutarch describes. Some scholars suggest a fast-acting poison applied through a pin or mixed into a drink. Strabo, writing shortly after, mentions a poisoned ointment. The truth is unknown. What is known is that she chose the method, the timing, and the staging. She chose to die as she had lived, in complete control of what people saw when they looked at her. After her death, Octavian did what Rome always did to women it couldn't defeat. He rewrote her. His poets turned her into a cautionary tale. The drunken foreign queen, the seductress who enslaved noble Romans, meretrix, whore. The word appears across Augustan literature like a stamp. For 2,000 years, that's the version that dominated. Every painting of Cleopatra draped over a couch in see-through silk. Every film that cast the most beautiful actress alive. Every retelling that reduced her to a body and a love story. All of it traces back to Octavian's decision to control the narrative. But the facts that survived his editing tell a different story. She ruled Egypt for 21 years. She was the last active ruler of a dynasty that had governed for 3 centuries and the last pharaoh of a civilization that had existed for 3,000 years. She managed an economy that fed millions. She commanded a fleet. She conducted diplomacy in 9 languages. She maintained Egyptian independence against the most powerful military force on earth for 2 decades.
And here is the detail that Octavian's propagandists could never quite suppress. Plutarch says it. Her beauty, in itself, was not altogether incomparable. It was not the kind that struck you upon seeing her. She was not exceptionally beautiful. The most famous seductress in history did not rely on her face. She relied on her voice, her mind, her understanding of what specific men needed and couldn't find anywhere else. She relied on her ability to construct an experience so immersive, so perfectly tailored, that the most powerful men in the world couldn't think clearly inside it. She relied on the oldest and most dangerous form of power, the ability to make someone feel, in your presence, more alive than they have ever felt before. Caesar was a mind that had never met its match. She matched it. Antony was a spirit that had never been given permission to exist. She gave it. 2 completely different men, 2 completely different approaches, 1 methodology. Caesarion was killed on Octavian's orders. He was 17. Octavian's advisor reportedly told him, "Too many Caesars is not a good thing." Cleopatra's surviving children by Antony were taken to Rome and raised in the household of Octavian's sister, Antony's abandoned Roman wife. The peculiar cruelty of that arrangement needs no commentary. Egypt became a Roman province. The Ptolemaic dynasty ended. The last pharaoh was a Macedonian woman who spoke 9 languages and smuggled herself into a palace in a bedroll and never stopped performing until the final curtain fell, exactly the way she designed it. You've just seen the mechanism behind the myth. Not a love story, a methodology. A woman who understood that the distance between controlling yourself and controlling the world is shorter than most people think. If that's the kind of history you come here for, the kind that shows you how power actually works instead of how it's supposed to look, subscribe to Dust and Dynasty. Because 2,000 years of propaganda couldn't erase what she did, only how we talk about it. This is Dust and Dynasty, where history isn't softened for comfort. We'll see you in the next one.